So we're going to get into how you can do stuff like this, where you bring out all the subtleties of all different types of folds, all the little intricacies that you're seeing. But to me, I think the best place to start is somewhere more like this. Simple sketches with lines, where you're going to explain that clothing, and you're going to do it in a really concise way. Now, when you're doing like a painting, or when you can use values, when you can use light and dark, you can very subtly indicate folds and stuff like that, and little ripples in the fabric and stuff. But when you've just got lines, you need to make a decision about which lines to include and which not to include. Now, if we just go in and we go, all right, well, whatever, here's a t-shirt. I don't know why this guy is making it sound hard, because all I have to do is look at the t-shirt, and then I just see the folds, and there's a fold here, 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 a fold here. You get the point, right? Very quickly, the drawing becomes a mess. The folds in fabric, in clothes, become overwhelming, and they can overwhelm your drawing so quickly, and you're suddenly lost in this labyrinth of complication and lack of purpose, lack of clarity. So we're kind of going for something a bit more like this. And even this sketch that I've got here, it probably has a little bit too many lines. Now, it's okay because this is like a t-shirt study. So it's okay to add a little bit more information to it. But really, I think this one, we could probably remove, right, a lot of this information, and it would still work, right? I'm just removing lines that I've put in, and I think it would still make sense as a t-shirt. It would still be fine. And if the sketch was more about just, you know, this person walking, and it's not about the folds in their clothes, then I think that's probably a better idea, is to dial down this information. But all right, we're doing a clothing study, so maybe we can increase it a bit. What we talked about and thought about in a previous video, check that one out after this one if you haven't seen it, is why are these folds occurring, understanding why they're occurring, right? So we've got folds, kind of vertical ones hanging off his shoulder blades, basically, off his shoulder structure. And then they hit his butt, which is sticking out a bit, and that pushes up this fabric, and that makes horizontal folds, right? So check out that video after this one if you want to understand the folds a little bit better. But what we're thinking about right now is how to draw them with lines without overwhelming the drawing, all right? So what we're going to do is we're first, if you notice here, I had an underlying sketch, right? A very simple underlying sketch. So why don't we recreate this just to sort of see what that thought process was. So the first thing is, this is a human being, and so what they're doing and what their body is doing is really important to this drawing, obviously, right? So we got a rib cage egg shape, and if you ever see our figure drawing stuff, you'll know that this is kind of where we start this from. We've got the shoulder structure. We get the neck. There's a sort of trapezius muscle that comes up into the back of the skull. Head is kind of like an egg shape. So it's really simplified understanding, right, of what's going on in the body. Kind of emerging from those shoulders, we get the arms and what the arms are doing. We get some muscles from the back coming up into the armpit, probably narrows a bit at the waist, comes out a bit around the hips. And it's a pretty sort of neutral walking pose, right? Down at the butt and thighs, we've got one leg, which is, you know, if we think about the thigh as a cylinder, we've got one that's slightly coming towards us. The other one's really going away from us though, right? So that's really important, is this kind of thing, is you don't need like super fancy figure drawing stuff to happen. But just like, oh, well, this thigh is basically a cylinder and it's doing this, and the other one is more going away from us and it's doing that, that is a really kind of useful idea, right? Okay, so we've kind of got the basics of the pose in, right? And, you know, do it with more care than I have here. Next, I think it's useful to just put in the structure of the clothes, right? So we're not going to start going, okay, now there's these 5,000 folds. But we're going to go, all right, well, It's kind of like a sort of tube that wraps around the torso, right? It across the neck, it just kind of flat across the back of the neck. It runs along the tops of the shoulders. Now, in the sleeves, what these clothes want to be doing is kind of this, but the arms are down, so that it's pulling them in, and so this side of the sleeve is hugging the arm here, and so we get excess sleeve on this side, like that, because the sleeve is much bigger of a tube than the arm, right? The arm and the sleeve are both little tubes, but the sleeve tube is bigger, and so we're going to have this sleeve hugging the arm on this side, but coming out with a bit of excess on the other side, right? So we're figuring out some stuff, just not folds. We could even put in the fact that there's little seams here that attach the sleeves to this sort of main tube of the t-shirt. I won't do the trousers, we'll just focus on the t-shirt for now. All right, okay, good. So we figured out some stuff. So maybe now I'll just change colors, and I'm gonna use like thick lines just so they're easier to see. But you'd probably want to start to use like quite thin lines in places, and we can talk about that in a minute. How about if what we do now is start to clarify the silhouette of this t-shirt, right? So now we can start to get into more specifics. So what I mean is like across the top, right? If we go across the top here, I'm just going across the top in red, it's still all just kind of hugging the figure. It's all quite flat. There's not a lot of interesting sort of extra folding happening. We talked about this excess along here, we go along here. This is all very, very simple. The folds aren't affecting the outline much yet. Okay, so that's fine. What we can now do, I think, is explain big, important overlaps. And so where one section of clothing is just straight up in front of another section of clothing. So for example, in these armpit areas, we get this part of t-shirt in front of the sleeve part of t-shirt, right? That kind of overlapping idea. So we've got this part coming up and then this part coming out from behind it. All right, if we come down this side of the t-shirt, it comes straight down and then it starts to come in, out, and like that. So we can start to explain that stuff happening, and we can come along the bottom of the t-shirt, maybe wrap it over, kind of cheat in a little bit of it wrapping over the butt a little bit if you want, and then it comes up here. Now what we get is something very interesting happening right here, all right? So what we've got now in here is we came up straight here, came in like this. This is one of our folds. This is a big, important fold. It's one of those half tubes, like we talked about, folds are basically these half tubes. This is one of the horizontal ones, right? Because the t-shirt is hitting the butt is sticking out a bit, and so it's creating that compression of the t-shirt, making these horizontal folds. And this horizontal fold is wrapping around the torso to the front. Okay, now why is it that even at this early stage of drawing this t-shirt, I want to include this? Because this fold affects the outline, it affects the silhouette. It's coming out like this. And then there's another one, this is one of our vertical ones, right? One of these vertical tubes, and that is going in front of this one. So this one comes around, wraps in front of the wraps around the torso, affects the outline. And then this one comes in front of that and affects the outline. Now here I want to give credit to an artist, an art teacher called Tom Fox, because he clarified this when I was in one of his tutorials, which is when the fold affects the outline or the silhouette, we can more easily include that information without overwhelming the drawing, right? So these would be like internal lines, but what we're doing now is we're just adjusting that silhouette to include and indicate this folding. And so rather than being another line inside, we've started to explain folding just in the silhouette, just in the outline. All right? Now there's another thing that's happening here, which is this is quite an impressive fold. So there's a couple of different types of fold, right? Some folds are just kind of like ripples in the fabric, right? I don't even know if, right, they're just kind of like this, just little waves, right? And if you put a stripe down along the middle of them, that stripe would just run smooth, uninterrupted over that fold, right? So let's say even this one here, which seems quite dramatic, it just comes up, right? If we were wrapping a line over this, it would be uninterrupted, just like that. Okay, cool, right? So that's a very relatively gentle type of fold. However, some folds are more dramatic than this. So some folds go a bit more like this. Okay, and if we were to run that stripe down the middle of them, it would end here, right? It would go away, it would turn away from our eyes, right? It would turn away from our eyes and then it would re-emerge again. So what's happened here is we've got this is the end, you know, of this form basically. This kind of cylindrical form in here is wrapped all the way over. I kind of think of these as ripples and these as foldovers, where they're really turning so much that they create an overlap. And those are more deserving of a line. It doesn't mean you need to draw them all in. Sometimes there's too many, but they're more deserving of a line. So if it's affecting the outline, affecting the silhouette, and if it's that kind of, or if it's that, or it's that kind of fold over situation, it's more deserving of a line. And so what we can do then is we can look at this and we immediately can tell that what's happening here is going to deserve a bit of explanation, because it's a fold over fold where it's one in front of the other, it's creating overlap, and another one, and it's on the outline, so it's less sort of expensive in terms of our lines. It's almost like not an extra line, it's just a modification to the silhouette. All right, so it's, if I was to put these lines in, my drawing would start to get overwhelmed by folds quite quickly. One reason for that is that these are just kind of ripples rather than full fold over type folds, all right? And also because they're internal to the silhouette. So this kind of fold here, you know, it's a full fold over, and this kind of overlap, these ideas are really worth putting in, okay? So why don't we come back and, you know, I started to put this stuff in red, so we could go, okay, so there's some folds here that we want to put in. I think there's a little bit of this bunching around the armpits that's worth putting in. They're really quite deep folds and they emanate from the armpit and they're kind of touching that silhouette. They're coming off that silhouette, right? So in this case though, I think I do want to show a little bit of like the vertical, which turns into the horizontal folding when it hits the top of the butt. So how could I do that, right? We talked about if we just do this, it's too much. So once again, I want to give credit to Tom Fox's tutorial where I learned this from, right? Which is, okay, if I start to draw this, I could offset those lines, right? So if I've got a fold like this, it's really excessive to put 2 lines on each side of it, right? That 2 lines on each side, you know, that's more for if it was like an actual cylinder, you know, and I would draw the edges of the cylinders. But for something kind of gentle wave like this, I don't think I want a full line around it, but I want to indicate it, and I've only got lines, so maybe I'll just kind of gently show that that is there. So I can use maybe thinner lines, maybe offset lines, maybe slightly broken up lines. And so you can see that that's what I'm trying to do here. And actually, like I said earlier, even this is a little bit excessive. And I think I could do with a lot less of this and it would still be fine, right? I could have a lot less visual impact, like sort of dominance from all these little clothing lines, and it would still be fine. But I kind of wanted to make them very, very clear and then show actually you can remove them and it's still gonna, it's still gonna be fine, right? I'm gonna try and remove loads and loads of these, especially where they're really facing us, so we don't get any of that folding over much at all, right? And it's probably still going to be fine. We're still going to make sense of it, So how much you want to include, how much you want to remove, that's kind of up to you. Okay. So why don't we just have a quick look at another example here, and then we'll look at, well, what if you want to get more, what if you want to include more stuff? I'm saying remove everything. What if you don't want to remove everything? You want to put in all the lovely folds and whatnot, right? Nothing wrong with that. So here, this is like a simple white t-shirt, but it's so easy for this to get really overwhelming. So we've got a lot of folding. So we get a lot of folding here in the sleeve and right under it. So we're at real risk here of overdoing things. I've tried to represent what's going on in this sleeve here. Once again, I think we could just kind of remove a lot of it and it would be okay. You notice how, like, if we kind of imply it in the outline, how it's folding, and maybe a couple of lines coming off the outline, you can imply a lot of folding without just being really in your face about it, right? So that's a nice thing that we can do, and I think that I could employ that quite a bit more inside of here, right? And just be a bit more gentle with it. Okay, but a couple of things when I look here. Some of these are kind of more like those kind of rippling folds, a bit more easy to leave out, and some of these are full-on foldovers, right, where they come down like here. If I was to let's say I try and run a stripe down this sleeve, comes down, it completely disappears from my eyes, re-emerges down here or something, right? Comes along like this. But then from here, it's just kind of rippling along the surface a little bit, right? And so I want to think about where is it that it just gets completely cut off like this, and where is it just kind of, rippling along. So I might give a little bit more to this and this and this, where I feel like I'm getting those kind of fold over type situation. Now, another thing I learned from Ryan Woodward, who's another great artist, is just to redesign your folds to be easier and clearer. So if it feels like, for example, down here, right, I can remove folds. Here, it's a lot, and I've already had a lot in the sleeve, and I want to have kind of active areas, and then I want to let the drawing rest a little bit. So a couple of things that I could try to do is I'll leave a little bit more of this blank, and I reduce and simplify the folds down here. And also, there's so much chaos happening around here. I'm trying to go, all right, well, if I've got complexity here, I want it to be passive and relatively empty. Then it's complex, then it's kind of passive, and then it's active again. So I'm kind of trying to do that, reduce the amount of information. I probably, again, would reduce this, even a little bit more. Simplify some of these, maybe break them up a bit, just so it's not so overwhelming. Because I think this pose has this real risk of just basically being really complicated here, and then relatively empty here, and I think I'd like it to be a bit more balanced. So I can redesign the folds to suit, I want to tell the same sort of story in terms of the physics, in terms of the folding, right? Like, I still want to say, like, it's bunching up here, it's bunching up here, and it's bunching up here, but I'm already sensing I need to do a bit of extra work to simplify it back, redesign it a bit, pull the lines, make them a bit more gentle. And what I'm definitely not going to do is go, well, I see this fold, this fold, this fold, because look at how chaotic all of this is. It's way, way too much. All right, now what if I want to learn how to do this? I think the first stage is line drawings, because it's going to push you to either put in a line or not. So when I look at this jacket, I go, these are just those ripples. they don't deserve a line. But down here, they're kind of, I'm getting like full fold over, like I'm getting overlaps. So those might deserve some lines. And if I leave out this, it makes a nice passive area, then this becomes a bit more active. So I get that kind of nice active-passive transition. Then I can use some materials that allow a little bit more sort of subtlety, which is like the charcoal pencil. So now I've got lines, but I can also show those gentler folds with softer transitions with the value, because I've got more values and subtlety that I can use. And then I can get into painting, right? So here's a watercolor painting, and because I've got all that subtlety of watercolor, I can show all the little ripples in the clothes, like down here. You know, I can show stuff, some stuff gently, and then where there's stronger folding and more important folding, I can use lines or harder edges, right? So stronger, harder edges. And I really think it's important to do those line drawings where you make that decision to leave stuff out before you get into this, because this allows you to just include everything, and having that editing skill is really important, I think, with clothes. Now, we have a clothing course. I've been preparing a really, really good clothing course, which is going to get into first how to draw clothes and their folds, but also how to get into the subtleties with values if you want like this, and also outfits, right? The structure of all kinds of outfits, which is going to be really fun, and how to draw them, different fabrics, different fabric types, so thick, chunky, you know, you want that. Because you want your clothing, if you're going to include clothing, it's all about what it says about that moment or that character, right? So the coldness, the struggle they've been through, you know, whether you're doing a fine art painting or an illustration, if when someone's wearing clothes, there is an expression to that. Why did they choose those outfits? What does it mean? And then also what's happening in the pose, in the gesture? How can we draw these folds to show, you know, the hunched over or the big dynamic, whatever they're doing? So there's a lot of different elements to clothes and to drawing and painting them well. And we break it down into a nice, simple set of step-by-step exercises which slowly build on each other. A lot of fun. Come and check out our clothing course. The link is below. And up on the screen is a tutorial about how to see and understand clothes, which goes together with this one. So check it out.